So now we know more about the history of terrorism studies, the main disciplines and approaches, and we also mentioned a number of names of persons and institutes that researched terrorism and counterterrorism. I can assure you that all these scholars and experts find it difficult to study these phenomena. Why is this the case? What challenges and dilemmas are they confronted with? Well, here's an overview of the main difficulties. On the left you see a list of some of the main difficulties. Well, last week we discussed the problem of definitions, and the lack of one is an obstacle in doing research on terrorism, for instance comparative research. How can I compare your results of a study on terrorism with my results if we don't use the same definition? Then we're comparing maybe apples and oranges. A lack of a definition is a problem in doing research. The second difficulty for research is the fact that terrorism is subjective and politicized. Think, for instance, about researching counterterrorism. Then you have to rely on reports by governments, by agencies that deal with terrorism. And of course they have a political agenda. Their vision on terrorism might be different than yours. And you have to be aware of the fact that there is a political agenda behind it. And that has, of course, an impact on the usability of these kind of reports. And then there's the problem of small numbers. It's a bit difficult to explain. How can small numbers in terms of terrorism constitute a problem? Of course, we should be happy about the fact that in many parts of the world there isn't that much terrorism. But for researchers it's partly difficult because it's easier it's easier to come up with very general statements, to come up with theories if the numbers are high. Then you have a lot of cases and you can say more precisely why people join terrorist groups or why they use a certain tool. This is not the case for terrorism. The numbers are low, but let's be happy about that. Number 4 on the list of main difficulties in doing research on terrorism and counterterrorism is the fact that these are very complex phenomena and that they're changing all the time. The terrorism and counterterrorism of today looks quite different from that of, let's say, a couple of decades ago. But the most challenging problem, dilemma, the most important difficulty in doing research on terrorism and counterterrorism is secrecy. How to deal with the secrecy that surrounds both terrorism and counterterrorism. How about learning about the actors involved, how to understand their motivations, why they do things, how they organize things, with all that secrecy that surrounds it. Think also about the names of many of these actors. We have intelligence services, but we're mainly referred to them as secret services, and we have secret agents. And the same holds for terrorist organizations. They also sometimes have names that indicate that secrecy. I already referred to the Weather Underground. Well, or actors with these names and all that secrecy involved is of course a big obstacle in doing research. For instance, how to interview these people. What about the opportunities to do so, which is standard practice in social research? And you want to know more about people, you knock on their door and you ask if you can have an interview. Well, that's very difficult in terrorism and counterterrorism studies. And what about participant observation? Meaning that you join a certain actor for a while, a counterterrorism agency or a terrorist organization, because you want to know what's going on there. Well, I think the chances that you will be allowed to do that are very, very small. The same holds for trying to get much information from the police and secret services. I tried to get access to files and archives, especially with very sensitive operational information. The chances that you will get access to these data is very small. You can send a polite letter to these agencies, but it's very likely you get a polite no as an answer. And then there are ethical problems. Even if you manage to get access to certain individuals or files, you run the risk of being blamed to be one-sided or to be too much understanding. And that mainly holds for having interviews with terrorists or alleged terrorists. Some people might not like it, might think you're unethical. And the same holds for interviewing or working closely together with all kinds of police and intelligence organizations. There are other groups of people who think you shouldn't do that. Partly, and that's related to the fifth challenge, it's partly related to the reliability and validation problem. If you interview these people, if you get access to their sources, they might try to fool you. They might give you their version of the truth. They might try to influence you. And it's very difficult, with all that secrecy involved, to validate, to really try to check that the information you get is valuable or not. It's an enormous difficulty, this secrecy, partly because it's related to ethical issues and reliability and validation. But nothing is impossible. One scholar that managed to overcome the secrecy problem is Jessica Stern, a leading scholar from Harvard that tried to answer the question, why religious militants kill. And she wrote a book, Terror in the Name of God. And she thought that the only way to answer the question why these people kill is to talk to them. So she talked to prisoners around the globe that in the past, at one point in time, wanted to be suicide terrorists or wanted to kill others in the name of God. And she got access to these prisons. It's an enormous effort to gain the trust of these people and also the trust of prison authorities. And in the end, she interviewed quite a few of them, I think showing that it is possible to overcome the problem of secrecy. But again, it costs her a lot of time, but it's a great book. I think it's one of the best efforts to try to understand the motivations of people to kill others in the name of God. And here at the Center for Terrorism and Counterterrorism of Leiden University, we've also tried to talk to former terrorists and people who allegedly recruit for the jihad in Syria. We think it's very important that you at least try to do so, and in some cases you can be successful. At the same time, we also have good relationships with law enforcement, the police, intelligence community, again with the aim to try to better understand these actors. But the secrecy involved in the work of these actors remains an enormous obstacle. In sum, there are many difficulties and challenges, and I guess that secrecy is the most important one. In the next video, we're going to see what scholars and experts have produced despite these challenges.